All right, Debbie Nelis has joined me, and if you were not with us right at the beginning, she's been through a very difficult situation. I can't think of anything worse, really. They have this beautiful, beautiful son, 17 years old, and took his life, and you've been looking at the myriad of dysfunction and everything that he had gone through. I think right up front I'd like to put his picture up.
That would be terrific.
Yeah. I can hardly imagine how you feel when you see it, but my audience is right now seeing a very, very good-looking kid, no doubt, just a promise, a future.
You know, Arthlene, that's it. People don't realize when you lose a child, you lose their future.
Mm-hmm.
There will be no marriage for Nick. There will be no children. And it's not just the loss of Nick, it's his brothers and sisters that lost a brother. And, you know, you and I talked about Nick having been molested by his father at 8 years old. When he came to me and shared that with me, I was talking to my sister, Anita, that's like Nick's other mother, that we don't even know how to talk to our children about that. When Nick told me what had happened, I thought about how they tell us, talk about good touch, bad touch. Let's talk about bad touch feels good. And then the guilt that follows with the child for that. But when Nick told me, you know, I was able to tell him he was doing the right thing by telling me that I loved him. I was very sorry for what his father had done. I took Nick back to his bed and I sat with him and he told me I could go back to my bed. And of course I immediately called. I attempted to prosecute.
Now, how old was he at this time?
He was 8 years old.
And had it happened when he was 8? He told you right away?
After we went to child protection. This is another thing people don't prepare you for, the judicial system being very inadequate. They interviewed Nick on video, and the caseworker told me she had rarely seen a child give such a good interview, that she had no doubt that it would go to prosecution. But his father lived in a different county, and obviously that prosecutor did not want to use his money to prosecute, so he refused to prosecute. But from that point forward, Nick's father completely abandoned him, and Nick had been very close to his dad. He had gone to his dad's every weekend, and so that was just a major impact, the molest and the abandonment. And I tried to get Nick counseling. Here's another thing they tell you, get your children counseling. The first time I told Nick we needed to talk to a counselor is the first time he threatened to take his life.
So he didn't want to do the counseling, which I'm sure most children would not want to.
Especially boys. You know, in my research, that is one thing that I have found so prevalent, that boys rarely tell, and it happens to boys more often than anybody thinks. And when they do tell, their acting out is so outrageous, you know, the anger. Nick would actually punch himself in the face. And I would still try to get him counseling. He would not talk to the counselors. He, of course, began to act out in school, and school did what schools do. They ultimately threw Nick out of school. But last year, well, June of '08, my home flooded, and I sent Nick here to live with Anita and her husband. And I came and enrolled him at Seminole, and we had talked about this being a great opportunity for Nick to start over, where he had no reputation and they had no negative expectation of him. That was August. We enrolled him at Seminole. I had to go back to Indiana to get my home ready to lease or rent so that I could come here, which I got here in February. Nick was already out of school. He was now working in a bar and grill, which I was very uncomfortable about. A 17-year-old boy has no business in a bar. Just way too much opportunity there and exposure. And that was February. By May, I knew that Nick was having trouble with drugs. He had experimented some at home. And my sister and her husband also knew that. We had actually talked about what to do for Nick. This is one of the things that I really want to say to people. You have got to intervene. Young people cannot navigate these dangerous waters on their own. They think they can, and they will push you off and try to make you feel like you're interfering with them, but you have got to.
Right.
You have got to. Anyhow, we had talked about possibly, for one, making Nick quit his job because we were sure that's where he was getting the drugs. Two, getting him in a program. He had actually talked to his Uncle Al the night that he took his life. He had cried on Uncle Al and my brother.
It's all right. Because he did
Wanted to get back on what we always called Uncle Al's good program, where he was saving his money and being honest with his family.
Yeah, and he did have this much family support.
He did.
It just seems like the combination, you know, and he was wanting to get back on track, but you can't, you cannot just forget how much drugs alter the mind when someone's in a, you know, in that kind of a frame.
Exactly. And people don't realize this either. You know, they think that drug addicts are just using people when they say they want to get better. That's not true. They do. But the pain of trying to let go of those drugs is so horrific. One of the first things that happens is major depression. When you try to withdraw those drugs, not just the physical aspect, the physical pain, but the mental descent that goes into like a black hole depression. And I believe that's what happened to Nick.
Well, the research that you have done, is it most of it, does it come from a molestation?
That's just
Have
it.
they-
Nobody is making that connection. I have not been able to find any research that has even viewed that as what percentage of these suicides. And the suicides are absolutely horrific. I Googled stop teen suicide in Florida. 147,000 sites came up. New York, 175,000. California. I mean, when you see that kind of sites on the internet, that tells you this is a major problem.
And I know you couldn't read all of those, but could you kind of grasp a pattern?
Well, one of the things that I found that was just really horrifying to me is that 17 seems to be a very turbulent age. It seems like that is an age where, especially with boys, that they end their life. And I think about the transitioning, you know, they're no longer a child, they're facing adulthood, and especially without a father to lead them into that. Mothers cannot lead young men into manhood.
Well, we know what molestation spawns just because of all those stories of priests in the Catholic Church, and these men came forward as adults and explained what it had done. It had really
Ruined
taken
their
their lives
lives.
from them.
Exactly.
And their futures and their education and everything. So, you know, if we just start there and try to protect our children from anything like that with anybody, and as Wanda was saying, you know, you really you don't want to distrust everybody, but you sure better have your antenna up, no matter what, because our news is flooded with even women teachers, you know, who molest children and all. We only have about a minute. How are you doing? I know you cry a lot, and I give you that privilege. I certainly do.
I do. Nothing will ever take the place of Nick. I cannot replace Nick. I cannot bring him back. But if I can do anything to keep another family from having to experience this, that is my goal. I am trying to get everybody who's involved with protecting children to come together in a big organization like MAD did against drunk drivers, because that's where we will really have an effect.
And we do have the website up right now, and it's so well named, In the Nick of Time. And I want you to pray for Debbie on a couple levels. Of course, that the Lord would comfort her, and He will. But also, and I want her to come back, but also to bring to the forefront a very, very serious situation that every one of us can do something about it if you really think about all that. Please stay with me. I have a couple things to say before we have to say goodbye.